Hello and welcome to another Converse seminar. And for this week, we have someone who I don't think I've met you in person, Arianna. Have I? I don't think I have.
No, never know.
It's Arianna Introna, and I noticed that she had just came along to a number of the early events we were having, and there's one thing I've learned when someone shows up at your events, they have something interesting to say. And then I discovered that she wrote a very interesting book on themes of disability in Scottish literature. So I said, "Hey, could you do a seminar?" She said, "Yeah." Um, and then after a few rounds of emails, you came up with something, and which is what you're going to present on today, which I think is I have to admit that I've seen relatively little work out there where particularly people engaging in sort of autonomism and anarchist thought are specifically engaging with ideas around disability, which I find it could be quite strange because you think there would be more of an overlap, but there's not. Um, but that's why this should be super interesting to hear. So with that, I will turn it over to Ariana.
Yes, thanks so much, Steven, for the introduction. I will, I will start sharing my presentation. Um, yes, yes. Yeah, can you hear? Okay, sorry, can you see and hear? Yes, yes. Yes, I must say thanks so much, Steven, for the invitation, but also for the series that I've been coming along to as many sessions as I could, and every time it's just been a joy, and my mind been filled with so many ideas of what to explore next. So thanks so much for bringing together all these papers. That's always a joy. Yes, so I was very excited when Stephen emailed me, and what I will present today is I brought together some of the work I've been doing on Crip Compositionisms after um, in the years after I published the book, continuing the exploration of the intersection between autonomist Marxism and in its different strands and disability politics and theory. Um, so some of it is where I've come with my work, and some is the like the trade union to a book I'm writing um, on the autonomous reversal of the perspective, whereby it's not um, capital's perspective that we want to adopt, but that of the working class in struggle and disability. So the hauntologies bit connects to the further project I'm doing, while the Crip Compositionisms one is a lot of work that I've done the past few years. So I'll get started. Yes, so I'll start with Harry Cleaver's association of autonomous Marxist theory, in his words, with an emphasis on the ability of workers to take autonomous initiative in the class struggle. So the first part of my paper will introduce what I would call an autonomous disability perspective as a perspective that might help us develop this emphasis of struggle by providing a critique of capitalism in a hauntological rather than ontological register, and it's Derrida, and I will get to Derrida in a second. So specifically, an autonomous disability perspective grasps how the capitalist mode of production is haunted by the pitfalls it encounters as it strives to insert disabled people into capitalist relations of production as workers. The second part of my paper will experiment with the concept of Crip Compositionisms to reflect on how compositional analysis may offer useful tools for locating disability as a socio-economic phenomenon in relation to autonomous modes and subjects of class struggle. So Crip Compositionisms, I will propose, insert a disability logic and presence within what Mario Tronti called working class autocritique, and also to excavate ways in which this logic and present may inflect the political recomposition of the working class and reconfigure both its horizons and its modes of struggle. And maybe in the discussion maybe we can connect to real life examples, and context. But my paper will be theoretical. So on the one hand, Crip Compositionisms focalize the specificities of the insights derived from different traditions of autonomist Marxist theory. On the other, they draw attention to how a disability-centered standpoint of struggle can contribute to the production of autonomist ontologies of the capitalist mode of production. Yes, so back to Cleaver's quote. So autonomist Marxist theory has an emphasis on the ability of workers to take autonomous initiative in the class struggle. So it is the autonomous focus on the potential for the working class to take a stand against capital that conjures, I would say, hauntologies of the capitalist mode of production in Jacques Derrida's sense of the term. So Derrida coins the term ontology to grasp the impact on ontological understandings that is sparked by the eschatological and teleological effects implicated in the discourse of the end or the discourse about the end. So different strands of autonomist Marxist theory produce distinct autonomist ontologies rather than a single ontology of the capitalist mode of production because of their starting point within the working class as a subject of struggle that threatens to bring about the end of capitalism, at least that's its end. So our end. So Crip autonomist Marxism conjoins an analytical perspective internal to disability, and this comes from Crip theory, with a perspective of struggle from which autonomist theory starts, compounding its ontological frame. So the two come together to spell the end of capitalism at the level of theory, at least. So for Stephen himself, the reversal of perspective that grounds the starting point of analysis within the perspective of the working class in struggle, and he's talking about operaism, operates as an emergent moment and movement of antagonism, which is at the same time an epistemological opening. And this epistemological opening is essential for bringing together autonomist theory with Crip theory, which does the same, which undertakes the same theoretical move. So it performs an epistemological opening by situating the perspective within disability as a possible ground for struggle. So the first part of my presentation there will explore ways of cripping this epistemological opening within the framework of a Crip autonomism that roots the autonomous reversal of perspective through the knowledge provided by the clash between non-normative or ill body minds and capitalist structures. So Crip autonomism starts in the spirit of the activity of disabled people's movements, and in the UK we have disabled people against cuts who have entered the class struggle in their own right. In a conscious departure from identity politics and with the aim of building a wide anti-capitalist movement. And on Deepak, we have a day of action on the 26th of March, which I recommend checking out, which is the theme will be welfare, not warfare. So it goes to the heart of the military industrial complex, as well as the attack on disabled people are as intertwined in a world that we all need to bring to an end. So in the spirit of so Deepak are an anti-capitalist movement, group. It's not about identity politics, and I won't go into the debate, but I think it's quite it's obvious for us in the UK who know the current circumstances. So in the spirit of an autonomous reversal of perspective, I will continue by reverse the social model of disability that groups like Deepak follow as a tool developed by disabled people and a guide for social action. So I won't have much time, so I will just explain what I mean by this. Basically, according to the social model, there is impairment, which is rooted in your body-mind, and then disability is socially constructed once your non-normative body-mind encounters inaccessible structures. So I will reverse. So this is the social model, which is a British social model of disability, which is somewhat different from disability justice and Crip theory. So in my paper, I will reverse the model just by through in the spirit of the autonomous reversal of perspective by saying it's not so okay. Disability is produced by capitalism and other structures, but capitalist structures for sure, of production and societal related structures. But at the same time, it's us who are reproducing capitalism. So at the same time, we cannot reproduce capital. So that's my reversal of the social model, and I will yes. So and in doing so, so with that in mind, going back to autonomism, for me, in order to reverse the social model of disability, to think disabled people not at the receiving end of discrimination, exclusion, but as being subjects of struggle with the potential to create problems for capitalism and for capital in the capital-labor relation. For me, appreciation of the differences between strands of autonomist Marxist theory is useful when we come to develop a Crip compositionism, because different strands, and we may think of positive autonomism, negative autonomism, they all, I think, can contribute something different to the encounter with disability justice movements. And just to recap, many of you may be familiar with, I'm sure many of you are. So the difference between negative autonomism and positive autonomism verge on the dialectics they work with. So while positive autonomism is concerned with the identification of the changing composition of the working class in relation to the restructuring of capitalism, negative autonomism tracks, in the words of John Holloway from Open Marxism, the negative and creative force of resistance to capital, expecting it to reach a positive configuration. So Holloway expresses this as a defining tension in autonomism between, on the one hand, the restless negativity of struggle and the defining thrust of positivity or positive theory on the other. On the one hand is open Marxism and negative autonomism, and on the other is positive autonomism with operism, post-operism, post-autonomia, and so on and so forth. And of course, this affects the configuration of struggle itself. For negative autonomism, struggle is negative, it's struggle against. It's restless, it overspills boxes provided to us by capitalism, while for so for me, so I'll check the time. Yes, so for here you are. For Holloway, from this perspective of a restless force that we are as a working class, we have the power to bring about the crisis of capitalism on the basis of its savage exploitative drive and the refusal this is bound to excite. And here he describes, his point is that a constant movement of faster, 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 that is what capital would like us to do, move faster, 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 cannot but encounter a rebellion. Yeah, and so how does disability fit here? My argument is that the intractability to exploitation that resides in non-normative body minds deepens the understanding of struggle that negative autonomism provides, just because it's impossible for these non-normative body minds to be inserted into a smooth process of exploitation. So this indexes the grounds on which negative autonomism, for me, is better attuned to grasping the revolutionary potential of non-normative body minds, which vastly exceeds the sphere of capitalist production that we marginally inhabit. In my other work, I work a lot with positive autonomism, but even if for me it's really open Marxism, Holloway's work that speak to the anti-capitalist power of disability as a socio-economic phenomenon. However, my intent in this talk and generally to locate because I want to locate the marginality of disability vis-a-vis capitalist relations of production. I want to use a positive autonomism because in proportion as my intent is to locate the marginality of disability within the technical composition of the working class and also its political recomposition, I need to work within the framework of positive autonomism and the classical definition of compositionism and compositional analysis that we inherit from operaism. Yes, so this is just to explain why ontologies of the capitalist mode of production, the negative autonomism, I won't stay with it, but it stands to reason that if, as Holloway says in his work, we are the memento mori of capitalism. And so this is a hauntological register that Holloway is using. The disability can help can encounter the working class in being the memento mori of capitalism, just by saying I cannot move faster as you're asking me to do. So this is I will stay with positive autonomism in the rest of my talk because I'm interested in Crip Compositionisms. So the understanding of the working class as a positive pole in the struggle against capital, which characterizes positive autonomism from its operaist beginnings to its post-operaist and post-autonomist developments, affords the possibility to pursue the formation of socio-economic phenomena such as disability in relation to and against the operations of capital. So we know that so the tradition of Italian autonomism, which originated in the form of the operaist movement, features as a central concern compositional analysis, from which I developed the idea of Crip Compositionisms. And its behavior as autonomous from the dictates of both the labor movement and capital allows us to attend to the nexus between technical and political composition of the working class, as people like Stephen have explored. Yes, post-operaist developed the operaist compositionist framework to trace a change in composition of the working class. And this comes to be a highly variegated, although integrated working class that is inserted within processes of valorization and exploitation. And this is, no, sorry. Yes. Yes, so for people like Negri or Metzadra, Michael Ard, they're interested in the multitude that lives within the crisis, but also has a potential to mature into a new working class that is rising up. So that's where the ontological register articulates with positive autonomism. I mean, the perspective of struggle is what makes for that ontological framework. And for me, it is the expansive mode of compositional analysis that positive autonomism, in its articulation as post-operaism, operationalizes, is what encourages the excavation of disability's place within the technical and political, the technical composition and the political recomposition of the working class. I want to mention Joanna Kerazelczy's autonomist adapted analysis of disability composition. Joanna has done groundbreaking work in developing a cultural materialist understanding of identity and the autonomist Marxist class composition as coming together to identify disability within the technical and political composition of the working class. And Joanna talks about a technical composition of disability and a political composition of disability, working but expanding the social model. So on the one hand is the historical contingent, in Joanna's words, nature of disablement, that directs our focus to materially rooted experiences, social positionality, and social relations. And on the other hand is on the possibility to explore the political recomposition of disability within a coalitional framework. And Joanna sees the two as mutually internally constitutive. Joanna's autonomist and adapted analysis of disability composition valorizes the materialist histories and potential for struggle immanent to the body-minded specificity of disability by infusing within autonomist presupposition, especially compositional analysis, a conception of oppression and liberation that understands body-minds, histories, and environments to exist in a dynamic relation with one another. So my thinking around Crip Compositionisms moves through similar logics, as I too explore a method of analysis which articulates autonomous compositional analysis with a focus on the potential for struggle that resides within the body-minded specificity of disability under capitalism. So this is just a plug for a network that Joanna and I are part of. That if anyone is interested, you can find us online, and we have monthly talks and other projects. It's very exciting. Yes, so in the rest of my talk, I will explore how a compositionist approach grasps disability contribution to deepening for the capitalist mode of production, the opposition between to be and not to be, in Derrida's words, that ground its ontology in both a teleological and eschatological sense. And my argument will be that Crip Compositionisms proliferate the ontological frames of the operaist working class autocritique, which I will discuss in a second, as well its insights into the vulnerability of the capitalist mode of production to working class resistance and possible connections between disability and anti-capitalist politics. So centering the perspective of struggle in class analysis is a defining feature of what Tronti calls a working class autocritique, the political task of which is to question the entire past historical course of the working class struggle, as well as the current state of antagonism of the working class. So working class autocritique rejects a mode of analysis, in Tronti's words, that puts capitalism development first and workers second, and seeks, in his words, to reverse the polarity and start again from the beginning, and the beginning is the class struggle of the working class as what directs the given forms of capital's development. Yes, so the working class from an operaist perspective is the working class in struggle. So in order to understand what the working class is, we need to understand how it struggles, and this is where, for me, a hauntological framework really applies to when we talk about working class autocritique. So I will. So Crip compositionisms embed a corporeal-centric starting point within compositional analysis. In particular, a Crip autonomist perspective and the Crip compositionisms that derive from it start with the anti-capitalist power of non-normative or real body minds as not productive for capitalism, so as to deepen the hauntologies of the capitalist mode of production produced by working class autocritique. So the question that Tronti encourages us to ask is, in his words, how is the working class composed internally? How does it function within capital? How does it work? How does it struggle? So class composition generates the possibility to bring about a positive and strategic moment for the revolution. So with this in mind, Crippin compositional analysis inserts into it a disability logic and presence as what owns the technical composition of capital and demands inclusion at the same time within the political recomposition of the working class. So to unpack the grounds of this haunting and inclusion, it's useful to consider the roots of the marginalization of disabled people under capitalism. And the disability theorists have discussed these issues, this issue for many from different angles, but some have talked about disabled people as non-laboring populations that are resistant to standardized labor demands and productivity. Hence, the ways in which we are harassed by welfare authorities, for example. Ellen Clifford has talked about the marginalization of disabled people as having to be deployed within a disciplinary framework, so that basically by harassing disabled people when we are dependent on welfare, non-disabled people should be forced to engage in work under the threat of impoverishment and harassment. So from a autonomist perspective, I propose the idea of Crip enchantments in my book, which is a way of, I use Federici's idea of re-enchanting the world to think about visions that challenge the logic of capitalism and those of normalcy as inseparable, while also visibilizing modes of organizing life alternative to those enjoined by the capitalist mode of production. So this is the ground for this model, so for what I will call the next step. Yes, so let me see. So starting with, so I really like the idea of re-enchanting the world and how we need different visions and perspective to before we can proceed to more materialist level. Franco Bifo Berardi expresses the aim to go beyond a narrow social reference, the workers, implied in the term operaism, so as to think about social composition or class composition as something that has to do with chemistry as well as much as with the history of a society. So staying with this idea, Crip compositionism start from an operaist framework that focuses on relations of production, but also work with later iterations of class composition analysis and thinking to expand beyond the narrow focus on the sphere of production that would perpetuate the marginalization of disability justice within the class struggle. So a compositionist approach along these lines examines the processes of subjectification that emerge from the material and symbolic marginalization of disabled people under capitalism as starting points from which to spread the forms of refusal they are entangled with. It interrogates specifically the processes whereby capital accumulation is organized in such a way that disables people, so the social model of disability, by excluding them from wage labor, that is the activity we need to survive and in the current society, so that just a small number of disabled people can achieve integration. So Crip Compositionism reads this othering and marginalization as foundational to the naturalization of capitalist society, basically, and so the need for capital to maintain a docile workforce. And also in order to identify forms of rejection of this othering as privileged locations from which to develop a mass refusal of the operations and logics of capitalist normalcy. So capitalism that's entwined with normalcy. So to develop this mass refusal, a Crip compositionism integrates what I will explain what it is, what I will so basically integrates a postmodernist position into working class autocritique, and I will already provide the definition of this modernism. So this modernism is a term developed by disability theorist Leonard Davis, and for Davis, this modernism is a concept that disperses the concept of disability so that it applies broadly across society as a civil right for all to be ill, infirm, impaired without suffering discrimination or oppression. So for me, the mass refusal that the working class can engage in from the perspective of Crip compositionism integrates this modernish ethics into a working class autocritique. On the one hand, for Tronti, a great new season of theoretical discoveries is possible only from the working class point of view, because the capacity for synthesis lies only in working class hands, and that's the first quote. On the other hand, however, this modernist perspective opposes any project which preserves as its universal subject an individual who is diverse but still whole, independent, unified. So for this modernism, form follows this function. So this modernist composition, with bringing together the two viewpoints, conflates this modernist synthesis with the synthesis pursued by working class autocritique to challenge the domination of capital over the whole of society. And thus so by undoing the othering that entrenches the naturalization of capitalist normalcy as a problem for the few, so disabled people, and instead revisions it as it being a problem for the whole of the working class. So the form of articulation is what connects the strategic vision of Trontian working class autocritique and its Crippian with what must be replicated in theorizing the relationship between Tronti's autocritique and his idea of the refusal of work and the insertion within it of a disability logical and presence. And the key point for me is that for Tronti, the starting point of struggle is where the working class is strongest. In his words, the chain must be broken, not where capital is weakest, but where the working class is strongest. And for Tronti, the working class is at its strongest as the productive hinge of society. On Tronti's account, on Tronti's account, the only way in which the working class can acquire strength for itself is through its operation as the living, active, productive element of society. And this is a problem for disability. Of course, I will jump ahead. Because, of course, as I was suggesting, non-normative and ill body minds do not fit this productive hinge of society. They are the opposite. Yes, so yes, so the incompatibility between body-minded non-normativity and the production of surplus value means that productive labor does not encompass many of us disabled people, whether we are included or excluded for the workforce. However, as Marx points out, this is not a misfortune. If productive labor is defined by its capacity to participate in exploitative social relations of production, that stamps the laborer as the direct means of creating surplus value. For Marx, to be a productive laborer is a misfortune, as the famous quote goes. So, valorizing the failure to satisfactorily engage in the capitalist relation on production through body-minded non-normativity and non-productivity consequently can be read as possessing the power to erode what James Chamberlain calls the ethical superiority of work. Yeah, and it is on this basis that productivist conceptions of the refusal of work can be cripped and radically transformed through the perspective of Crip Compositionisms. So, yeah, so if historical direction of society, as Tronti tells us, unfolds towards some form of refusal of work, creeping its possibilities produce an assertion of the autonomy of labor from a standpoint that, however, valorizes non-productivity as what does not reproduce or produce capital. So a Crip compositionism reroutes working class autocritique in the pursuit of a more radical, I would say, form of refusal of work that does not merely expand upward to include those who occupy non-productive bodies, but takes its lead from them. So I'm coming to an end. So this vision of refusal of work constitutes a departure in a way from Tronti's traditional conception of the refusal of work as coming from the center of the relations of production. And if we think of when Tronti thinks of the refusal of work, he thinks of it as a momentary blockage of in his words, of the work process that appears as a recurring threat, which derives its content from the process of value creation. It happens after we have accepted to sell our labor power. However, because of this modernist conception of society sees non-productivity as belonging to everyone, that this modernist working class autocritique produced through a Crip compositionism roots in mass productivity, roots in mass non-productivity, its vision of work, and in and the contribution to deepening autonomist ontologies of the capitalist mode of production as well. And this vision reads the highest form of the refusal as happening not where we all laboring people unify into one pole, but when we come together around our common non-productivity. So ultimately, Crip compositionism suggests ways in which recognizing disability in our midst renders class struggle inseparable from these modernist processes of subjectification that can expand to the social body as a whole. And by tracing the insertion of a disability logic and presence as constituting perspectives and agents of struggle, they can unleash the potential of autonomist Marxism, both to include a variety of subjects and processes of subjectification within the political recomposition of the working class, but also its potential to operate in a hauntological framework. And this for me is what keeps the horizons of class struggle that in ways that make thinkable and possible a total break with the reproduction of capital. And I've reached the end of my talk. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you for that. There's a lot of stuff there. Um, and so maybe let's take a second to pause and think and then see if we have any questions. I think we'll have at least a few. I mean, maybe what I'll start with is one of the things that I really like about the perspective you're developing here, and I think what's really interesting about using autonomy here is rather than starting with, let's say, the real or imagined capacities of certain bodies. So when you talk about the industrial working class, you usually think about like burly dudes in factories, right? Autonomous starts more with sort of like what is the capacity of certain populations to resist or interrupt a labor process, and which kind of like almost like flips the sort of flips things. And I've been thinking about this a lot, but particularly this week because we've seen in the current Tory government seems to be particularly intent on demonizing disabled populations, right? And so I'm wondering, is the demonization of disabled populations because of the way that they have or carry a capacity to interrupt capitalist reproduction? Like it's almost like you have to mess with them because if you can be because if you can be seen to not be constantly reproducing capital, you become a problem for everyone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense, and yeah, I really like how you phrase this. Um, s- yeah, so I think yeah, the flipping up perspective that you talk about in your work in really exciting ways um, is what certain modes of thinking, autonomism, like your own, really allow for expanding. Our exploration of the capacity for resistance that different subjects within the working class have, different categories beyond, yeah, the industrial working class, and that helps, I think, inserting a disability focus. So totally that idea of the capacity for resistance is key, and um, and autonomism, I think, and that's where Holloway comes in strongly. You look for the actual impossibility we all have to keep going, and whatever line of work we are in, it's really difficult to so disabled people can cope, but people who do not identify as disabled, people who are not, or people who are ill, and keep going, but they keep going against the odds, really, because it's the ways in which work is organized is unsustainable. And I think being ill, having a non-normative body mind, just makes that obvious, but it's not that that mm, that impossibility to continue is not there. Um,
If I could just add one more thing before Peter comes in. I think what really is really interesting about this week is the sort of ideological trap. At the same time, the government is saying, "Oh no, there's too many people on disability. Why aren't they working?" At the same time, they're also attacking the payments that enable people to get into work. So it's like, how do you both sort of say, "Why aren't you working? We're going to take away funding that helps you get assistance so you can work, and then we're going to blame you for not working."
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and that's yeah, my work generally. I think that a lot of what I do is really work on, as an activist. I'm welfare action, where I'm active in, and also my other research is on welfare and social security, because I think that's really the key, as you are saying. And with universal credit, I don't want to go into too much depth, but how recent changes, the idea is that the work capability assessment, before disabled people were not meant to apply for universal credit. They had other work related benefits. Now we've been moved onto universal credit, and the idea is that we were going to still have to go through the work capability assessment to determine whether we were entitled, whether a disabled claimant was entitled to the health component, so the disability component on universal credit, and in theory should have been able not to this would be reflected in the claimant's commitment in a more light touch in theory. So all these changes are really, and then the next step is what you are describing, that it's disabled people who are not in work who are going to be targeted heavily, while also there is a lot of money being put into services that are going to activate support disabled people into work. So there is this really this also symbolic attack on disabled people that this demonization, but also this sense of terror that is instilled into disabled people and the working class widely, because you don't want to be disabled if you are going to find yourself in that situation. You want to be to keep working and to try and I don't know how, but yeah, and I think that's precisely for me is to increase the allure of work that occurs and is not there. Should It's just ridiculous, but uh, you don't want to be the disabled person on benefit. You want to try and work, and so I think it's both at the material and at the symbolic level that the demonization and the attack on disabled people works precisely to entrench the position of wage labor as a desirable one, which makes no sense under capitalism, of course. I would say. Thanks. I don't know if I've answered.
No, that's good. Peter?
Yes, no, I really appreciated that, and I thought it was very like full of different ideas, but I think really important point about reconfiguring what we think about productivity here and value and who's making this decision. But I kind of wanted to ask a couple things that are around it. And again, this is not my area, so it's more almost in like solidarity as well, right? Um, so I think one of the first things is that, you know, with autonomous Marxism, I think there's kind of like two aspects that are often, or two strains that aren't mutually exclusive, but the first one I think was very theoretical and was obviously part of the more kind of radical revolutionary aspects. That was very much, I think, within this framework of rethinking what theoretical Marxism offered away from a particularly kind of deterministic view. The other, which I think is now often in an uncredited way, but still there, is the kind of more practical praxis of like, how do we set up, essentially, incorporating social reproduction, you know, a rethinking of cradle to grave, non-capitalist forms of care, right? Um, and both of these were not mutually exclusive, but I thought what was really interesting was that the latter was very much about, you know, thinking about logistics as creativity. And my experience working, in collaborating with colleagues who have various types of disabilities is that, and this sounds really horrible, is like by the subject positioning them as disabled, you kind of lose the fact that actually in practice, because of the almost they have become, they're usually the most creative in terms of just getting their shit together. Like, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that as a very boring middle manager now, as Steven knows, I don't know how I end up with the things. It's literally like people who, do have physical disabilities or do have mental disabilities that because of this capitalist subject position of like nothing is works has been created for me. So for the last 3 decades, I have been pretty much figuring out how to make things work that often have the most, I would say, creative aspect. And I'm wondering, is there something here in terms of this kind of less theoretical but more praxis-based things about saying, can we, just as Autonomist Marxism tried to reconfigure the discussion of capitalist operation from, in many ways, just, mechanization and regulation to something more creative and caring, to also kind of bring in the disabled, quote unquote, subject position into, well, in a post-capitalist society, like, we don't want to deny that actually, like, these things will be harder, but actually they bring in the types of creative solutions we need for productive value creation. The other part I wanted to kind of say that I thought was interesting is that, and this wasn't, but I wanted to bring in the kind of generational aspects, and this because I think one of the key things that I do think is important, and you mentioned Derrida early in this kind of question of potentiality, and I think one aspect of Derrida that is, even though he's very much into the spectrum Marx, is that Derrida's talking about, for better or worse, a demos, right? And he really believes a demos, right? Like, his community is not class composition, it's a democratic community. And thinking about that, I've also been quite interested in, within these types of subject positions of disability, right? The ways in which you are, particularly in hauntology, not you, but like, they are inscripted in struggles and democratic discussions and decisions that were made 20 years before them, right? And how do we create structures that are both sustainable and victories that are both, I don't want to say permanent, but victories that are sustained and are protected, with also every being able to create intergenerational and I say more contingent discussions about every generation has what it needs. So I know, like, for instance, in the US, it's one of the few places in which the US is uh, advanced, that I mean, the 1970s Disability Act was really far reaching, and that's really, really, like, important. But I know from activists and just even friends who have a variety of disabilities, they're like, yeah, it's like we care about all that, but it's really inscripted now also. Like, it's completely narrowed the debate of what we can ask for and what we should be fighting for. And also, like, all the people who are older, who were part of this generation in the 70s, when they think, it's almost, they're so protective of it that, like, when we say, we're respectful of all that you did, but, like, that was a time in which they had very different ideas of who was disabled and what we need and these types of things. And so, we don't want you to have to necessarily, like, spend £1 million for every building for a move up. Like, instead, what we need is more communities of care that can help, these types of things. And I'm wondering, just because autonomous Marxism is a different type of community in a certain way that Derrida is talking about, but this kind of, thinking radically about, what does an intergenerational demos look like here, in terms of being able to say, I both want to be respectful of how this has shaped me as a subject, but also not be imprisoned by it in a certain sense, if that makes sense.
Yes, thanks so much. Two very, very fascinating subjects to think about. I will try to offer my thoughts, but I think yeah, there will be. I think, I mean, I think there are questions that us as doing theory and our movements as well need to contend with a lot, and starting with the creativity that comes with disability. As you are saying, it's one of the starting points for any. So when we do not think from the standpoint of power, of external power, of oppression, when we are, so like I was in this lived experience focus group, and basically we were asked to provide our to share our experiences of welfare, and so it was always all about harassment. So that's the perspective of oppression, power. But when otherwise, when you step out of that, yeah, I think creativity is one of the most common issues that are commented upon by people with non-normative body minds. And as you're saying, that could be an added, that could be a bonus to any space, not so much in the sense maybe thinking of autonomous spaces like a social center of a group. Of course, there are mishaps that happen, but you engage with those and you grow from there. So in a more like anarchist, prefigurative way that you want that society of really reorganizing relations continually so as to flourish and grow together. That creativity, I think, can be valorized under capital. It would be a matter of changing the structures. I think that's where the British social model is useful, that if you have a non-normative body mind, but that fits a specific task you are asked to complete, that you can complete that better than someone with a normative mind or normative body mind. So in that sense, you would not be disabled in relation to that specific task, but other. So of course, capital could integrate us, most of us, and that's I don't think it does, especially in this current conjuncture, which I think. So I think it's a good time because, for me at least, of us taking a stand in relation to what we want to do of this really difficult time for disabled. I agree. I think disability could be integrated into processes of production. If it could happen like into any. I think it would disappear as disability probably. And the reason, so it would need a lot of work, and maybe, and I think Joanna or other comrades, maybe it would be a lot of thinking around the technical and the organic composition of the working class, that we would need to make calculations about what would be needed for a surplus to be generated. So I'm sure it could be done, but yeah, and the question is, with that creativity, where we want to challenge it, and yeah, I suppose. And I know that I have friends with working in cooperative, within the cooperative movement, and I must say that they were saying that still it's difficult to be for disabled people to be part of those, and the reason they were providing is the standardization of work processes. So I suppose the problem for capital and for other principles of organization of production is that standardization that maybe is needed for the smooth reproduction of certain processes, and that's where. So the person I'm talking about is called Steve Graby. He does work on the issue, and it was very interesting because I thought it's always, yeah. So I don't know how that connects. We need to really step beyond and reorganize, I would say, in an anarchist prefigurative manner, social relations, so that relations are fluid and we reorganize our spaces when we see that there is a problem. I think that it's the way to integrate non-normative body minds for me. And I will be brief about the second, which is really amazing from a generational perspective. I think I really liked your question because in the past few years there was this discussion, like you were mentioning, of the kind of legislation we have that is not enough to protect us and rigidifies certain ways of self-identifying, and even the ways in which we envisage struggle. And many comrades, Bob Williams is one, has written a book they were addressing this issue about the straitjackets that we are inheriting in a way, and that we may want more. We may want to be anti-capitalist. It's not enough those rights that we have. But I think this past year, the attack on both on accommodation within the workplace and the attack on disabled people at the level of welfare, I think it's kind of changing where we are, because I think we are the confrontation with structures that were not working and that were rigid, and we had inherited them, and there was criticism that they were not enough. I think now there is an exacerbation of attack on disabled people in and out of work that force us to really rethink. It's not about staying with inherited structures, because those structures are being dismantled. So like you are saying, what we want is something we need to be revisioning what we are struggling towards. I think I don't know if I've answered your question.
No. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, I find this very important and interesting. So no,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very rich
Yeah.
and very on.
And what your point made me think that last night there was a call by Deepak, Disabled People Against Cats. There were more than 400 people in the past 15 years that I've been an activist. There was never something like that, never. It's huge number for over 400 disabled people on a call to organize action. It's unique. I'm not saying that it's good that the situation is bad, but but I think your question is important, because I hope that it's a moment for really engaging with that issue that we've been thinking about, of these inherited social legal structures, rethinking those and rethinking what we want to fight for. So thank you again for that question. I will keep thinking about it. I haven't exhausted, but thanks so much for the two great points.
Right on, right on. I was muted telling you, Stephen, that you're muted.
Yeah, well, that happens. Other folks have any other questions? If no, maybe I will ask one thing. If it's okay. I've just been reading the book Storming Bedlam by Sasha Durakov, which is a really quite interesting sort of history of sort of I'll call it like radical approaches to mental health. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if there exists a different, almost you might call it like autonomous counter history of disability studies. Because one of the things that strikes me quite interesting about his book, and thinking about the way you talk about hauntology, is it goes through all of the categories of how madness is defined legally and institutionally over hundreds of years. And I'm guessing you could probably find a sort of different counter history of where disability comes from as a concept, what it's haunted by, and what imaginaries it haunts. And I was thinking that might be quite interesting, but I've never read anything like that because, well, like Peter, this is my particular area. So I just was wondering if that is something which is a thing.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really like that book, and I think totally grasps that. I'm a big fan of the also the utopian thinking and challenges. But in terms of what you were describing, I think totally many people are contending with how disability is defined, has been historically defined by welfare systems and what came before. So like disciplinary and bureaucratic structures by offering identities that and positions that were needed so as to ask for support. We were internalizing specific identities, and so I think, and the social model, the British social model, I think, is particularly something that we might want to criticize for that, because I think that's very powerful. It's a standpoint of oppression. Oppressive social structures create us disabled people. So the standpoint of oppression is built into that. So I think for me, it's a prime example of what happens, of how the bureaucratic and disciplinary and social structures we inhabit furnish the identities through which we make sense of ourselves. And there is and for the states, Crip theory, for example, and disability justice for me are more promising for movements. Thinking in terms of movements, just because they go beyond that. That definition through the eyes of power that I think Storming Bedlam talks about, and that is key for disabled people. And if we think of people with thinking of long COVID, for example, there is a resistance by people who have developed long COVID to identify as disabled. It's a journey. And in theory, by seeing yourself as disabled, you can enter a space of struggle, but still at the same time you are absorbing that idea, that passive, in a way, definition of yourself as a subject to structures that disable you. But still you need to go through that moment of definition, and there is resistance because people maybe have long COVID and don't see themselves as disabled. They see themselves as having fatigue, of having, so as living beings, not as objects of something. So I think yeah. So I think that yeah, that I think that's how I think at least for me, one of the thing I really like about Storming Bedlam is one of those books that forces you to contend with those tricky issues that yeah, that when we enter specific movements or areas of theory as well, and I'm thinking about the social model because we are in the UK, and so I struggle with that a bit. You need to accept that passage through external definition of yourself that are oppressive or constraining in many cases. Yeah, but thanks so much for mentioning the book and that question.
Cool. And thank you for the answer. That was really good. Are there any other questions? Peter. I feel like we're doing a tag team like wrestling thing.
Yeah, but first we can see if maybe Asif Giacomarella has any questions, because I don't want to.
It's okay if not.
Oh, look, I like your mug. It has like a teddy bear. So I just wanted to ask something that I think is interesting here, like for me at least, is that when we're having this situation of cuts and this kind of crisis of care in a wide range of context, that like the person in many ways in the US, for instance, who has been most responsible for pushing this is also someone who has been very, very vocal, but in a very particular way about neurodiversity, right? And I wanted to maybe explore a little bit because I think it touches on what you're talking about, is like how someone like Elon Musk has been able to, I think, in a very serious way, weaponize some of the kinds of discourses, not just of disability, but inclusivity, and also value that I think you touch on in your paper, and I think it's been something that, like, I remember, you know, for instance, before like when he was on hosting, and for people who aren't from the US, you may not be as familiar, but Saturday Night Live, which was a kind of really big deal. And it's a, for this, it's a major sketch show in the US, and it has like celebrities who host it every week. When people criticized, he's like, well, I don't see why you can't be just happy that I'm the first neurodiverse person to host Saturday Night Live. And this became like a very strong discourse of then kind of turning into from, I'm supporting inclusivity to this kind of gives me my quote unquote superpower to be, such an amazing capitalist. And it just made me think about, like, not only are we dealing with structural issues of care, but also the weaponization of quote unquote disability discourses in the name of advancing the very kind of capitalist conditions that I think you're trying to organize and theorize against.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for raising that, because I mean, your example is just amazing. I think I would say that at a less, I don't know, awful level, the disabled people organization, Inclusion Scotland, that I'm part of, and I do things with, they had this lived experience program, which was, I can't remember the name, but it was like a leadership. It had leadership in it, and so basically it was precisely that idea that disabled people can aim and believe and work towards being CEOs and stuff like that, which is just ridiculous. But there were participants who were CEOs, and we were put into this. And as part of this program, we were given the opportunity to talk or spend time, I can't remember, with the CEOs. So I think that's ludicrous, and but I think there is a point in there. Body minding non-normativity can fit capitalist relations and relations of production, and discourse is essential for it's, and the symbolic aspect of it is essential. It just so back to your first point. Yeah, that's doable. It's difficult, and I would say, because still, if you have a neurodiverse person just plunged into a standardized work environment, it doesn't necessarily. I don't think I think issues would arise that can be managed, but it's not easy. It's not really easy. If you think of CEOs, probably, because the point, I think, if you plunge someone with a non-normative body mind into a standardized environment, issues are going to arise that you need to manage, and that takes effort. That's a complex situation. It's not smooth, but it can be done. And if you match properly the body minding non-normativity to a specific kind of productivity that you want to achieve, probably you are going to have to achieve that level of productivity. It's a lot of work. You need to do the thinking around that. As I think the political position for me would be just that all of us, disabled and non-disabled people, we want to be a problem for capitalism. And as disabled people, we have a specificity in terms of how we want to do that. So I suppose the starting point would be, yes, we could, but I'd rather not. That would be my position. Like, yeah, and I think it happened in my life as well. And yeah, one final point, there is this term purposive failure, which is coined by cultural disability theorists David Mitchell and Sharon Snyder, which all my life I've wanted to work with that concept, and I've never done, because I always felt it wasn't the right time for me to do so, because I think it's so key. So purposive failure, I think, goes to the heart of the matter. Disabled people, we can fail to reach, I don't know, employment or whatever. passively just by not matching. But what if we are inserted and we find ways of increasing productivity? I don't think we want to go there. I think that, okay, I failed time and time again. Now I embrace purposive failure. Bye bye. I'm not going to try again. And I think that's something that maybe, I don't know, that's something. So for me, it's trying to reach purposive failure as soon as possible, because as you are saying, maybe as disabled people, we will not always fail to find employment and to increase productivity. So before we get to the point where we do not fail and we find employment and increase and contribute to productivity levels, maybe we want to take that purposive moment of refusal. I don't know if I've answered.
No, for sure. That makes perfect sense, right?
And I think that's maybe a good point for us to thank Arianna, and to thank you for coming along.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Stephen, for inviting me and for organizing the whole series, which I'm a fan of. And thanks, Stephen, Peter, for the questions that really made me think and will make me think as I ponder over them. Yeah, so thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Jack, and for coming, and Mirella for coming. Thank you all so much.
Oh, thank you.